The Montana dirt tastes like copper and regret as Jack spits blood onto the ground. His attackers circle him in the gathering dusk, their faces hidden but their intentions clear. 3 generations of sweat and sacrifice bleeding away with each labored breath. 60 days until foreclosure. 60 days until strangers walk the land, his grandfather cleared by hand. Final warning, the leader growls, delivering one last kick to already bruised ribs. Pain flares white hot, but it's nothing compared to the agony of failure, of becoming the Reynolds who lost it all. Some say the land remembers promises kept and broken, remembers the calloused hands that tended it through drought and plenty. As headlights disappear down the rutted road, the battered rancher rises slowly, tasting blood and something else determination. What a man won't do to save his legacy. What he can't imagine is that salvation will arrive in a broken wagon, driven by a woman with secrets of her own and a score to settle. Sometimes the land chooses who will fight for it. The Montana sun beat down mercilessly as Jack Reynolds drove the final post into the dry earth, sweat streaming down his weathered face. At 48, his body still carried the disciplined strength of his Marine days. But new aches reminded him daily that time marched on relentlessly. He straightened, surveying the repaired fence line that marked the eastern boundary of Wildwind Ranch land that had been in the Reynolds family for 3 generations. Good enough, he muttered to himself, tossing the hammer into his pickup's bed. Good enough had become his standard these days. Not perfect, not excellent, just good enough to hold things together for another season, another month, another desperate week. The harsh reality sat heavy in his pocket, the latest notice from First Montana Bank. 60 days until foreclosure proceedings would begin on the 300 acres that his grandfather had cleared by hand, that his father had expanded with stubborn determination, and that Jack had promised to preserve when he'd buried his father 5 years ago. 300 acres that would soon belong to someone else unless he could conjure up $350,000. Jack's horse, Thunder, a sturdy American quarter horse with intelligent eyes, nudged his shoulder as if sensing his distress. "I know, boy," Jack said, patting the horse's muscular neck. "I'm running out of tricks." The drought had devastated his hay production for the 3rd consecutive year. The cattle herd was down to 30 head, barely enough to maintain operations. The small horse breeding program that had once been Wildwind's pride had dwindled to just 7 animals. Every avenue he'd explored for additional funding had led to a dead end. At night, alone in the ranch house that echoed with memories, Jack wrestled with the question that haunted him. Was it finally time to let go? The crack of a gunshot sliced through his thoughts. Jack's head snapped up, body instantly alert. The sound had come from the west, near the old logging road that rarely saw traffic. Another shot followed, then shouting, "Thunder, let's go!" Jack swung onto the horse's bare back with the fluid motion of someone who'd spent a lifetime in the saddle. The quarter horse responded immediately, breaking into a gallop toward the source of the commotion. Jack's mind raced through possibilities as they thundered across the pasture. Poachers, maybe, though hunting season was months away. Drug runners were known to use the remote roads that snaked through this part of Montana. Whatever it was, gunfire this close to his property meant trouble. As they crested the hill overlooking the logging road, Jack saw the scene unfold below. A handsome custom wagon with gleaming wood panels had been forced to stop, its wheel apparently damaged. 3 men on horseback surrounded it, one holding the driver at gunpoint, while the others appeared to be confronting someone inside the wagon. Even from this distance, Jack could tell this was no random encounter. The methodical positioning of the riders suggested an ambush. Without hesitation, he urged Thunder down the slope, his hand reaching for the rifle secured in the saddle scabbard, a habit from years of protecting his livestock from predators. "Hey!" Jack called out, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a man accustomed to command. "What's going on here?" The 3 men turned, startled by his approach. Up close, their appearance confirmed Jack's suspicions. These weren't locals. Their gear was too new, their manner too aggressive. The leader, a scar-faced man with cold eyes, kept his pistol trained on the wagon's driver while assessing Jack with a calculating gaze. "Private business. Rancher?" the man drawled. "Best ride on and forget what you saw." Jack's gaze shifted to the wagon. The driver, an older man in a professional uniform, sat rigid with tension, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. From within the wagon, Jack caught a glimpse of a woman poised, elegant, and utterly furious. "This is my land you're on," Jack lied smoothly, knowing the road technically bordered his property. "And I don't recall inviting armed men to threaten travelers on it," the scarred man sneered. "Your land won't be yours much longer from what I hear. Reynolds, Wild Wind's days are numbered." The casual mention of his name and ranch sent a chill through Jack. This wasn't random. These men knew exactly who he was. Before he could process this, the man nearest the wagon made a sudden move, reaching for the door handle. In one fluid motion, Jack raised his rifle. "Step back," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Instead of complying, the man drew his weapon. Jack fired a warning shot into the ground near the man's horse, causing it to rear in panic. As the rider struggled to control his mount, Jack used the distraction to close the distance. The leader swung his pistol toward Jack, but Thunder responded to the subtle pressure of Jack's legs, sidestepping with remarkable agility. Jack brought the rifle butt down hard on the leader's arm, sending the pistol flying. The third man charged, but Jack was ready, dismounting in one swift movement to meet the attack head-on. Years of Marine combat training took over. Jack blocked a wild punch, countering with a precise strike to his attacker's solar plexus that left the man gasping for air. The second assailant had regained control of his horse and was circling back, drawing a knife from his boot. "Jack, down!" A woman's voice called from the wagon. Pure instinct made him drop to the ground as a shot rang out. The knife-wielding attacker cried out, clutching his shoulder as he fell from his horse. The scarred leader, recovered now, assessed the situation with cold calculation. "This isn't over, Reynolds," he spat, backing his horse away. "Tell your new friend she picked the wrong side." With a gesture to his companions, he retreated, the wounded men following hastily. Jack rose cautiously, dust coating his jeans, and approached the wagon. The woman inside held a small, elegant pistol with the confidence of someone who knew how to use it. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her clothes expensive but suitable for country travel. Most striking were her eyes sharp, intelligent, and currently blazing with controlled anger. "Thank you for the assistance," she said, her voice cultured with just a hint of southern warmth. "Though I believe I returned the favor." Jack nodded, acknowledging her marksmanship. "You handled that weapon like a professional." A slight smile touched her lips. "One of many skills my father insisted I master." She holstered the pistol in a concealed compartment of her travel bag. "I'm Eleanor Harrington. My friends call me Ellie. And you, I gather, are Mr. Reynolds of Wild Wind Ranch." "Jack," he corrected, turning his attention to the injured driver. "Your man needs attention, and your wagon's not going anywhere with that wheel." He examined the damage the wooden wheel had splintered where it hit a strategically placed rock in the road. "This wasn't an accident. Those rocks were positioned to force you to stop." "I suspected as much," Ellie replied, her expression darkening. "Martin, how bad is it?" she asked her driver. "Just a cut, ma'am," the older man assured her, though the gash on his forehead suggested it might need stitches. "But the wheel's beyond roadside repair." Jack made a quick decision. "My ranch is just over that rise. We can tend to that cut there, and I've got tools that might help with the wagon." He paused and studying their faces. "Unless you'd prefer I escort you to town, it's about 15 miles north." Ellie considered for only a moment. "Your ranch, if it's not an imposition, I'd like to be off this road before our friends decide to return with reinforcements." Jack nodded, appreciating her pragmatism. He helped Martin secure the horses, a magnificent pair of thoroughbreds that confirmed his initial impression that this was no ordinary traveler. As they made their way slowly toward Wildwind, Jack's mind returned to the scarred man's words. How did these strangers know about his financial troubles? And why would they specifically target Eleanor Harrington? The woman herself remained composed but vigilant during their short journey, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Jack recognized the behavior. It was the same alertness he'd maintained in hostile territory during his tours of duty. Whoever Eleanor Harrington was, she was accustomed to assessing threats. Those men, he said as they approached the weathered arch that marked the entrance to Wildwind Ranch. They knew who I was, and they seemed to know you too. Ellie's expression revealed nothing. The hazards of traveling in certain circles, Mr. Reynolds. Some people take an unhealthy interest in one's movements. It wasn't an answer, but Jack didn't press. Everyone had their secrets, and he had enough problems without taking on someone else's. As they crested the final hill, Wildwind Ranch spread out before them, a sprawling property nestled against the backdrop of distant mountains. The main house, a substantial two-story structure of weathered wood and stone, stood proudly among several outbuildings. To the east, pastures stretched toward the horizon. To the west, a creek wound through a stand of pines. Despite its current financial troubles, the beauty of Wildwind was undeniable. Jack noticed Ellie studying the layout with an appraising eye, taking in the fenced paddocks, the barn complex, and the rolling terrain. You have remarkable land here, Mr. Reynolds, she said, a note of genuine appreciation in her voice. Jack, he reminded her, and yes, it's special. Been in my family for 3 generations. He didn't add that it might not make it to a 4th. After settling Martin in the kitchen with a first aid kit and ensuring the thoroughbreds were comfortable in a paddock near the barn, Jack led Ellie to his workshop to examine the damaged wheel. The spacious outbuilding was organized with military precision tools hung in designated places, equipment parts neatly categorized on shelves. You're methodical, Ellie observed, watching as he assessed the splintered wheel. Jack shrugged. Marines teach you to keep your gear in order. Habit stuck. He ran his fingers along the fractured wood. This is high-quality craftsmanship. Custom-made, yes, by a wheelwright in Virginia. Family business. 5th generation. Shame to see it damaged, Jack said. The split follows the grain. Intentional weakening. I'd guess. Someone knew what they were doing. Ellie's expression hardened. So not just a random robbery attempt. No. Jack moved to a corner of the workshop, rummaging through stored items. I might have something that could work as a temporary replacement. My father never threw anything away. As he searched, he was acutely aware of Ellie exploring the workshop, her gaze lingering on the plans and sketches pinned to one wall, designs for an expanded training arena and stable complex that would never be built now. You were planning expansions, she asked. Jack pulled an old wagon wheel from beneath a tarp, avoiding her eyes. That was before the drought. Before reality set in, understanding flashed across her face, but she mercifully changed the subject. You mentioned you were a Marine. 3 tours. Force recon. He carried the wheel to his workbench. Came back when my father had his first stroke. Meant to be temporary, but he gestured vaguely at the ranch around them. But the land gets in your blood. Ellie finished for him. I understand that. Something in her tone made Jack look up. For a moment, behind her composed exterior, he glimpsed genuine empathy. It disappeared quickly as she stepped forward to examine the replacement wheel. Will this work? She asked. It's not a perfect match, but with some modifications, it should get you to town. Jack began gathering the tools he'd need. I can have it ready by morning. Morning, Ellie frowned. I was hoping we could be on our way sooner. Jack gestured toward the workshop window where dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. Storms coming in. These Montana spring storms can get nasty fast. Roads will be mud within hours. He met her eyes directly. Even if I could fix it quicker, I wouldn't advise traveling tonight. Not with those men potentially still around. Ellie assessed the approaching weather front with obvious frustration before nodding. You're right, Of course, if you're certain it's not an imposition, we'd be grateful for shelter tonight. No imposition, Jack assured her, though in truth, unexpected guests were the last thing he needed with his current situation. But his father's voice echoed in his memory. A Reynolds never turns away someone in need. Guest rooms are modest but clean, and I make a decent beef stew. A genuine smile briefly illuminated Ellie's face. Then we accept your hospitality, Jack Reynolds, and perhaps you'll let me compensate you for the repairs and lodging. We can discuss that tomorrow, he replied, turning his attention to the wheel. Some instinct told him that Eleanor Harrington was accustomed to solving problems with money. For reasons he couldn't quite articulate, Jack was determined not to be one of those problems. As he worked, he sensed her watching him, those intelligent eyes assessing more than just his repair skills. Jack had the distinct impression he was being evaluated, though for what purpose, he couldn't begin to guess. The storm arrived with dramatic suddenness just as Jack was finishing dinner preparations. Thunder cracked overhead as rain lashed against the windows of the ranch house. The wind howled around the eaves, a mournful sound that had always made the house seem lonelier to Jack. Tonight, however, the kitchen was filled with the aroma of simmering stew and the presence of unexpected companions. Martin, his head now properly bandaged, sat at the kitchen table regaling Jack with stories of roads traveled and adventures encountered. Ellie had excused herself to make a phone call, stepping onto the covered porch despite the storm's fury. Jack stirred the stew, half listening to Martin while watching Ellie through the window. Her posture had changed during the call, the casual elegance replaced by a commanding presence, even as rain swirled around her. She spoke with sharp, decisive gestures, clearly giving instructions rather than receiving them. When she ended the call and turned back toward the house, Jack quickly refocused on his cooking. "Smells wonderful," Ellie said as she re-entered, smoothing her damp hair. If she noticed his observation, she gave no indication. "I haven't had homemade stew in ages." "My mother's recipe," Jack replied, ladling the hearty mixture into bowls. "Secret ingredient is a touch of coffee." "Coffee?" Ellie raised an eyebrow, accepting the bowl with a grateful nod. "Unusual. Mom always said a little bitterness makes the sweet part sweeter." Jack set a basket of fresh baked bread on the table. "Like most things in life, I suppose." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the storm providing a dramatic backdrop to the cozy scene. Despite his financial worries, Jack found himself enjoying the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with others, something that had become rare in recent years. "This land," Ellie said eventually, breaking the silence. "How much of it is still actively worked?" The question seemed casual, but Jack sensed an underlying purpose. "About 200 acres for cattle and hay. The rest is either woodland or too rocky for cultivation." He hesitated, then added, "Used to lease another 100 acres to the north, but had to let that go last year. And horses, I noticed some quality stock in your paddocks." Jack's pride briefly overcame his caution. "Wild Wind was known for quarter horses once. My father had an eye for bloodlines. Built a solid breeding program." He stared into his stew. "We're down to just the core stock now. Because of the drought. Drought, rising costs, falling prices, take your pick." Jack reached for his water glass, wishing it contained something stronger. "Why the interest in my operation, Miss Harrington?" Ellie set down her spoon, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm a consultant for the equestrian industry. I evaluate properties and operations for potential investment or development." "Is that what brings you to this part of Montana?" Jack asked, skepticism evident in his tone. "Actually, yes," she replied smoothly. "I'm scouting locations for a client interested in establishing a training facility." Martin coughed slightly, drawing a quick glance from Ellie before she continued. "Your land caught my attention during preliminary research. The topography is ideal for certain types of training." Jack's hackles rose. "My land isn't for sale, Ms. Harrington, financial troubles notwithstanding." I never suggested it was, Ellie countered, unruffled by his defensiveness. There are many forms of development that don't require change of ownership. Before Jack could respond, a tremendous crash of thunder shook the house, and the lights flickered once, twice, then died, plunging them into darkness. Perfect timing, Jack muttered, rising to retrieve the emergency lanterns he kept ready. As he moved through the familiar space, he heard Ellie's phone ring again. "Eleanor Harrington," she answered, her voice carrying in the darkness. There was a pause, then, "When are you certain?" Another pause. "No, secure the documents first. I'll handle the rest tomorrow." The tension in her voice was unmistakable. Jack returned with lit lanterns, setting one on the table between them. In the golden glow, Ellie's face appeared troubled. All business now. "Problem?" he asked. "Nothing that can't wait until morning," she replied, though her expression suggested otherwise. "Your power outages frequent, common enough during storms. Generator should kick in for the essential systems." As if on cue, the hum of the backup generator vibrated through the house, restoring lights to the main rooms. Jack was about to suggest coffee when a new sound cut through the storm's rumble, the frantic barking of his cattle dog. Scout. Jack was on his feet instantly. Scout was too well trained to raise an alarm without cause. "Something's wrong," he said, already moving toward the mudroom where he kept his boots and coat. "What is it?" Ellie asked, rising as well. "Scout doesn't bark at nothing." Jack grabbed his rifle from the rack by the door. "Stay here, both of you." But Ellie was already pulling on her own coat. "Two sets of eyes are better than one," she said firmly. "Martin, stay with the house." Jack wanted to argue but recognized the determined set of her jaw. He handed her a powerful flashlight instead. "Stay close." They stepped out into the storm, the wind immediately whipping rain into their faces. Scout's barking led them toward the barn, his dark shape barely visible as he raced back and forth in front of the structure. "What's stored in there?" Ellie shouted over the wind. "Hey, feed! Equipment!" Jack called back. "And 7 horses, including your thoroughbreds." As they drew closer, Jack detected what had agitated Scout, the acrid smell of smoke, barely perceptible through the rain-soaked air. He broke into a run, Ellie keeping pace beside him. The interior of the barn was hazy with smoke, though no flames were immediately visible. Jack rushed to the stalls where the horses were beginning to panic, whinnying in distress. "The fire's in the back," Ellie called, her flashlight beam cutting through the smoke to illuminate a growing blaze near the hay storage. "The electrical panel." Jack cursed. If the fire reached the main hay store, the entire barn would go up in minutes. "Get the horses out," he shouted to Ellie, grabbing a fire extinguisher from the wall. Without hesitation, Ellie began opening stall doors, her movements efficient and confident. Jack battled the growing flames, but it was immediately clear that the extinguisher wouldn't be enough. "Jack, the sprinkler system," Ellie called over the panicked sounds of the horses. "Manual override by the main doors," he shouted back, continuing to fight the spreading fire. Ellie ran for the control panel, yanking the emergency lever. Water rained down from overhead sprinklers, but to Jack's horror, only half the system activated. The section over the equipment area remained dry as flames climbed higher. Systems compromised, Jack realized, abandoning the futile extinguisher. "Get those last horses out now." They worked in desperate tandem, leading frightened horses through smoke and confusion. Thunder, remarkably calm amid the chaos, helped herd the others toward safety. Jack's mind raced. The system had been inspected just 6 months ago. This was no coincidence, not after the attack on the road. As they led the final horse, one of Ellie's thoroughbreds, from the barn, a support beam weakened by the fire crashed down behind them, narrowly missing Ellie. Jack pulled her clear as burning debris scattered across the barn floor. Outside, rain continued to pour, providing some protection for the other structures. But it was clear the barn was lost. They could only secure the horses in the paddock and watch as the flames consumed the building, despite the storm's efforts to quench them. "I'm sorry about your barn," Ellie said softly, standing beside Jack as the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. Jack's jaw clenched. This wasn't an accident. First the attack on your wagon. Now this. I agree. Ellie's voice had hardened. The timing is too convenient. Jack turned to her, rain streaming down his face. Those men knew who I was, and they knew about my financial situation. Now my barn burns the same night you arrive. His eyes narrowed. What aren't you telling me, Ms. Harrington? Ellie met his gaze unflinchingly. I have enemies, Mr. Reynolds. It appears you do too. Beyond that, I'm not at liberty to say more right now. Not at liberty? Jack's voice rose in disbelief. My livelihood is going up in flames, and you're talking about liberty. I understand your frustration. No, you don't. Jack cut her off. That barn isn't just a building. It's feed for the winter. It's equipment I can't replace. It's the last of my father's breeding records. His voice cracked slightly. It's one more nail in Wildwind's coffin. Ellie's expression softened. Jack, The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted her. Headlights cut through the rain as two trucks pulled into the ranch yard, followed by a fire engine. Neighbors, Jack realized. In rural Montana, word traveled fast, and help came without being called. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. The volunteer fire department battled to save what they could of the barn, while neighbors helped secure the horses and salvage equipment. Jack worked alongside them, the physical labor a welcome distraction from the questions swirling in his mind. Ellie proved surprisingly capable in the crisis, organizing the retrieval of salvageable items and caring for the frightened horses with expert hands. Jack observed her quiet authority as she directed volunteers and calmed animals. This was no ordinary consultant. It was nearly dawn when the last of the neighbors departed, leaving promises of help for rebuilding. The rain had finally stopped, and a ghostly mist rose from the smoldering ruins of the barn. Jack, exhausted beyond words, found Ellie sitting on the porch steps, equally drained but still somehow composed. The fire chief says it was definitely arson, he said, lowering himself beside her. Accelerant used at multiple points, and the sprinkler system was deliberately disabled. Ellie nodded grimly. I suspected as much. He's called the county sheriff. They'll want to talk to both of us. She tensed almost imperceptibly. Of course. Jack studied her profile in the growing dawn light. You know something about this, about who might be behind it. It wasn't a question, and Ellie didn't treat it as one. Instead, she seemed to come to a decision, reaching into her coat pocket to withdraw a worn magazine. She handed it to Jack without comment. Even in the dim light, Jack recognized the prestigious equestrian publication, and on its cover, unmistakably, was Eleanor Harrington, resplendent atop a magnificent horse, gold medal gleaming against her riding jacket. The headline read, Triple Gold Medalist Eleanor Harrington retires from competition to focus on training next generation. Hannah, Jack stared at the magazine, then at the woman beside him. The elegant rider from the cover and the mud-streaked, exhausted woman on his porch were undeniably the same person. Yet in person, without the professional lighting and formal attire, she seemed more human, more real. You're not just a consultant, he said finally. No, Ellie admitted. Though that part is true, I do consult on equestrian facilities. Why the deception? She sighed, running a hand through her disheveled hair. Experience has taught me that people behave differently when they know who I am. They see the medals, the media coverage, the connections, not the person. I wanted your unfiltered opinion of the land, of its potential. For what? Jack demanded, his patience worn thin by exhaustion and loss. For exactly what I said at Training Academy. Not for some nebulous client, but for myself. She turned to face him fully. I've been searching for the right location for 2 years, somewhere with varied terrain, good soil, appropriate facilities, or the potential for them. Jack laughed bitterly. And you thought a failing ranch on the verge of foreclosure fit the bill. I thought a property with 3 generations of horsemanship in its bones might be perfect. Ellie countered. What I didn't anticipate was that someone else might have their eye on the same land. Jack's laughter died. What do you mean? Those men who attacked us weren't random bandits. I believe they work for Wesley Chamberlain. The name hit Jack like a physical blow. Wesley Chamberlain was the ruthless CEO of Ironclad Development, a corporation known for acquiring distressed properties and transforming them into luxury resorts. Rumors of shady tactics followed Chamberlain like shadows, though nothing had ever been proven. Chamberlain's been buying up ranches all through this valley, Jack said slowly. There's talk of a massive resort development. More than talk, Ellie confirmed. My sources indicate Ironclad has already secured most of the properties they need. Wildwind is one of the last pieces of the puzzle. Jack's mind raced. The bank foreclosure? You think Chamberlain's involved? It would fit his pattern, Ellie said carefully. Create financial pressure, then swoop in to rescue distressed owners with lowball offers. Bastard, Jack muttered, pieces falling into place. The denied loan extensions, the sudden increase in property taxes, the errors in his supply deliveries all could be explained if someone was deliberately applying pressure. So that's why you're here, he asked Ellie. To outbid Chamberlain. She shook her head. I didn't know about Chamberlain's interest until recently. My interest in this region is genuine, based on its suitability for what I want to build. She paused. But now that I understand the situation, I'd like to propose an alternative to both foreclosure and selling to Ironclad. I'm listening. To a partnership, Ellie said simply. You keep ownership of the land. I invest in developing an equestrian training facility on a portion of it. The rest remains working ranch land, potentially transitioned to hay and feed production that could supply both our needs and create additional revenue. Jack stared at her, searching for the catch. Why would you do that instead of just buying your own place outright? Because land with history, with generations of care and knowledge embedded in it, has something no amount of money can buy. Ellie's expression was earnest now. And because what I saw last night, the way you handled the crisis, the respect your neighbors showed you, your instinctive understanding of the animals confirmed what I suspected from our first meeting, you're the kind of partner I've been looking for. Jack, someone who understands that excellence isn't just about facilities or pedigrees, but about heart and heritage. Before Jack could respond, the crunch of tires on gravel announced a new arrival. A county sheriff's vehicle pulled into the yard, followed by a plain sedan. As they approached the porch, Jack recognized Sheriff Dan Hollister, a man he'd known since high school. The other man, however, was a stranger, tall, distinguished, with an air of quiet authority. Jack, the sheriff greeted him with a grim nod. Heard about the fire. Damned shame. Dan, Jack acknowledged, rising stiffly from the steps. Thanks for coming out. The sheriff turned to Ellie with obvious recognition. Ms. Harrington, didn't expect to find you here. Sheriff Hollister, Ellie replied cordially. Unfortunately, I seem to be at the center of some unwelcome excitement. So it seems, the sheriff gestured to his companion. This is Agent Keller, FBI. He'd like to ask you both some questions. Jack's eyebrows rose. The FBI's presence elevated the situation beyond a simple case of arson. He glanced at Ellie, whose expression revealed nothing beyond appropriate concern. Of course, she said smoothly. Though I should mention that Jack and his neighbors have been fighting the fire all night. Perhaps questions could wait until after some rest. Agent Keller shook his head. I'm afraid this matter is time-sensitive. Miss Harrington, we have reason to believe last night's fire is connected to an ongoing federal investigation. Jack looked between the agent and Ellie, a suspicion forming. What kind of investigation? One involving Wesley Chamberlain and Ironclad Development, Keller replied, confirming Jack's growing intuition. Specifically, allegations of racketeering, fraud, and most recently, acts of intimidation and property destruction designed to force sales of targeted land. Ellie's posture changed subtly, a tightening of shoulders, a sharpening of focus. And you believe Wildwind Ranch is one of those targets? We know it is, the agent stated. What we don't know is why you're here. Ms. Harrington, your presence adds an unexpected variable to the situation. Jack turned to Ellie, the question hanging between them. She met his gaze briefly, then addressed the agent. My interest in this property is legitimate and completely separate from Chamberlain's, she said firmly. I'm exploring a potential business partnership with Mr. Reynolds related to equestrian training. Keller studied her with professional skepticism. A rather convenient coincidence. Not entirely, Sheriff Hollister interjected. Ms. Harrington has been researching properties throughout the county for months. My office assisted with some background checks on available parcels back in January. Jack looked at Ellie with renewed curiosity. She'd been investigating the area long before his financial situation had become desperate. Nevertheless, Agent Keller continued, your presence may have accelerated Chamberlain's timeline. Our intelligence suggests Ironclad was planning to wait for the formal foreclosure before moving on this property. The attack on your wagon and subsequent fire indicate they've abandoned subtlety, making them more dangerous, Jack concluded, and potentially more vulnerable, Keller agreed. Desperation leads to mistakes. As the conversation continued inside the house over much-needed coffee, Jack learned the extent of the FBI's investigation into Ironclad development. For over 2 years, they had been building a case against Wesley Chamberlain, documenting a pattern of fraudulent practices and increasingly aggressive tactics. We've identified several of Chamberlain's operatives, Keller explained, spreading photographs across the kitchen table. Jack immediately recognized the scarred man who had led the attack on Ellie's wagon. Thomas Reeves, former military contractor with a record of assault charges that mysteriously disappeared. He's Chamberlain's enforcement specialist. That's him, Jack confirmed. He knew my name, knew about my financial troubles. Keller nodded grimly. Chamberlain's operation is sophisticated. They typically insert people into local banks, tax offices, anywhere they can manipulate the financial pressure on target properties. So my loan extensions being denied, the tax reassessment, probably not coincidental, the agent confirmed. Jack felt a complicated mix of emotions, anger at being manipulated, relief that his failures weren't entirely of his own making, and a growing determination to fight back. What do you need from us? He asked. Cooperation, Keller replied simply. We're close to bringing charges, but we need more concrete evidence linking Chamberlain directly to these intimidation tactics. Most victims have been too frightened to testify. Or too defeated, Jack added, thinking of neighboring ranches that had sold under suspicious circumstances. Exactly, Keller agreed, which makes your situation unique. Mr. Reynolds, with Ms. Harrington's unexpected involvement, Chamberlain's operation has been forced into the open. The attack on a public figure of her stature changes the equation. Ellie, who had been quietly observing, leaned forward. You want to use us as bait, she stated. Not a question. Keller had the grace to look uncomfortable. I wouldn't put it that way. But that's what it amounts to, she pressed. You want Chamberlain to believe his intimidation is working, that Jack is considering selling in hopes he'll reveal himself more directly. It would accelerate our timeline considerably, the agent admitted, and put Jack at even greater risk, Ellie countered. His barn is already gone. What's next? His house, his livestock. We would provide protection, Sheriff Hollister assured them, discreet but effective. Jack considered the proposal, weighing the risks against the satisfaction of helping bring down the man who had contributed to his current predicament. But something still nagged at him. You seem to have a personal stake in this, Ms. Harrington, he observed. Beyond your interest in my land. Ellie exchanged a glance with Agent Keller, who nodded slightly. Eleanor Harrington isn't just cooperating with our investigation, Keller explained. She's been instrumental in initiating it. Jack looked to Ellie, who met his gaze with a mixture of determination and old pain. Chamberlain didn't start with Montana, she said quietly. 5 years ago, He used the same tactics in Virginia to acquire a significant portion of horse country, including, her voice faltered momentarily, including my family's breeding farm. My father fought the pressure until his heart gave out. After his death, I had no choice but to sell. I was traveling constantly with competitions then, couldn't manage the place alone. I'm sorry, Jack said, understanding now the empathy he'd glimpsed earlier when discussing his own father. When I retired from competition and began planning my training academy, I started hearing similar stories from across the country. Different development companies, different fronts, but the same methods and always leading back to Chamberlain. Her expression hardened. I've spent the last 2 years gathering evidence, connecting victims, and working with the FBI to build a case. And now the case has come to my doorstep, Jack concluded. I didn't know Chamberlain was targeting Wildwind when I first researched this area, Ellie insisted. That's not why I'm here. But now that I do know, I can't stand by and watch history repeat itself. Jack believed her. The passion in her voice, the genuine grief when speaking of her father, these couldn't be fabricated. But that left him with a difficult decision. If I agree to help with your investigation, he said to Keller, I want assurances, not just protection, but assistance with saving my ranch. Even if we bring down Chamberlain, I'm still facing foreclosure in less than 60 days. The FBI can't interfere with private financial matters, Keller began, but they can expedite certain processes. Ellie interrupted, including the verification of partnership agreements that might satisfy your bank's concerns. She turned to Jack. My offer stands, regardless of your decision about the investigation. I believe in what Wildwind could become, and I'm prepared to make that investment immediately. Jack studied her for a long moment. I need time to think, he said finally. About all of it. Of course, Keller agreed, gathering his photographs. But not too much time. Mr. Reynolds, Chamberlain won't wait, and neither will your bank. After the officials departed, Jack and Ellie sat in exhausted silence at the kitchen table. The events of the past 24 hours seemed surreal, from a chance encounter with a disguised Olympian to federal investigations and arson. You should get some rest, Jack finally said. It's been a hell of a day. Ellie nodded, the fatigue evident in her eyes despite her composed demeanor. What about you? Too wired to sleep, he admitted. I'll check on the horses, make sure everything's secure. I'll come with you, she offered, rising from her chair. When he began to protest, she added, I've been up this long, might as well see it through to a proper morning. Outside, the sun had fully risen, illuminating the devastation of the barn in harsh detail. Against this backdrop of destruction, however, the horses grazed peacefully in the paddock, apparently recovered from their night of terror. They're resilient, Ellie observed, watching the animals with obvious affection. Adapt to circumstances better than most humans. Survival instinct, Jack agreed. Once the immediate danger passes, they return to essentials: food, water, rest. There's wisdom in that, Ellie said softly. They walked in companionable silence to the paddock fence. Jack's mind was still processing everything he'd learned, trying to reconcile the woman beside him with the champion from the magazine cover, and both with the determined investigator pursuing Wesley Chamberlain. Why a training academy, he asked suddenly. After winning at the highest levels, why not enjoy retirement or go into broadcasting like most champions? Ellie considered the question, her gaze following a young mare as she trotted along the fence line. Because medals and accolades aren't what drove me, she answered finally. It was always the connection, that perfect partnership between horse and rider when everything else falls away. I want to create a place where others can discover that, where the focus isn't just on winning, but on the journey. And you think Wildwind is that place? I know it is, she said with quiet certainty. The moment I saw your land, I felt it. There's something here, Jack. Something special that can't be manufactured or replicated. Her words resonated with Jack's own feelings about the ranch, sentiments he'd struggled to articulate to the bank managers and loan officers who saw only numbers on spreadsheets. I should hate you, You know, he said conversationally. Ellie raised an eyebrow. For, for making me hope again. Jack turned to face her. I'd almost made peace with losing this place. Almost convinced myself it was inevitable, that I'd done everything possible, and then you show up with your proposition and your belief in what Wildwind could be, and suddenly I'm fighting again. Is that so terrible? It is if I lose anyway, Jack admitted. Hope makes the fall harder. Ellie's expression softened. Or it gives you wings. She placed a hand lightly on his arm. I understand your caution, Jack, but I meant what I said about a partnership, with or without Chamberlain in the picture. I believe in what we could build here together. The sincerity in her voice was undeniable. In that moment, standing amid the ruins of his barn, with foreclosure looming and enemies circling, Jack made his decision. All right, he said. Let's do it. All of it, the partnership, the investigation, bringing down Chamberlain. But we do it my way. A slow smile spread across Ellie's face. And what way is that? Exactly, the Marine way, Jack replied, a dangerous glint in his eye. We take the fight to them. Over the next week, Jack and Ellie developed a two-pronged strategy. On the surface, they began the formal process of establishing their business partnership, creating the documentation necessary to satisfy the bank's requirements for extending Jack's loan. Ellie's financial team moved with impressive efficiency, transferring funds for initial investment and drafting agreements that would protect both parties' interests. Beneath this legitimate business activity, however, they worked closely with Agent Keller to set a trap for Wesley Chamberlain. The plan was deceptively simple. Let information leak that Jack was considering multiple offers for the ranch, including one from Ironclad Development. The implication that Jack might sell to a competitor would likely force Chamberlain to make direct contact rather than working through intermediaries. He'll want to negotiate personally, Ellie predicted during a strategy session with Keller. Chamberlain's ego won't allow him to lose a property he's targeted, especially not to me. Why especially not to you? Jack asked. A shadow crossed Ellie's face. Because I was the one who got away. After my father died and I sold our farm, Chamberlain approached me about becoming the face of his equestrian resorts, using my name and reputation to attract wealthy clients. I refused, publicly. He doesn't forgive perceived slights. The personal dimension of the conflict explained much about Ellie's determination, but it also added risk. Chamberlain's vendetta against her might make him more reckless or more dangerous. As part of their cover, Jack and Ellie began working openly on plans for the training academy. They brought in architects to survey the property, met with county officials about permits, and began clearing debris from the burned barn. To any observer, it would appear that Wildwind Ranch was being transformed through legitimate investment. The response from the community was mixed. Some neighbors welcomed the economic boost the academy would bring to the struggling region. Others viewed the changes with suspicion, seeing them as the beginning of the end for traditional ranching in the valley. Jack found himself defending Ellie and their partnership at the local diner, the feed store, and even his own kitchen when friends stopped by. She's not buying me out, he explained repeatedly. This is a partnership. The ranch stays a working operation. Most were eventually convinced, especially when Jack began hiring local workers to help with the initial construction. In a region where jobs were scarce, the influx of work was a powerful argument. Through it all, Jack was surprised by how naturally he and Ellie fell into a working rhythm. Her expertise in equestrian facilities complemented his knowledge of the land. They disagreed often, Ellie's vision, sometimes clashing with Jack's practical concerns, but these disagreements inevitably led to better solutions than either would have developed alone. More surprising was the ease of their personal relationship. Despite their different backgrounds, they shared core values of respect for tradition balanced with innovation, a deep connection to the land, and an unwavering work ethic. In quiet evenings after long days of planning and building, they exchanged stories of their fathers, finding common ground in the legacies they had inherited and the responsibilities they carried. Then, 10 days after the fire, the trap was sprung. Jack received a call from his bank manager requesting an urgent meeting regarding his loan situation. When he arrived at the bank, he found not only the manager but also Wesley Chamberlain himself, impeccably dressed and radiating confident authority. "Mr. Reynolds," Chamberlain greeted him with practiced warmth. "I hope you don't mind my joining this discussion. I believe I may have a solution to your financial difficulties." Jack feigned surprise and concern. "Mr. Chamberlain, I wasn't aware Ironclad had an interest in my situation. We take a keen interest in the economic health of communities where we invest," Chamberlain replied smoothly. "And we've been developing quite a presence in this valley." The bank manager, clearly uncomfortable, excused himself to give them privacy. Once alone, Chamberlain's demeanor shifted subtly, the warmth receding, replaced by calculated assessment. "Let's speak frankly. Reynolds, your ranch is failing. The bank will foreclose in less than 50 days. I'm offering you a lifeline $400,000 for the property, well above market value given its condition. You walk away debt-free with a substantial sum to restart elsewhere." Jack pretended to consider the offer. "That's generous," he acknowledged. "But I've recently entered into preliminary discussions with another investor." Chamberlain's eyes narrowed. "Eleanor Harrington," he stated flatly. "Yes, I'm aware of her sudden interest in Wildwind. Then you know she's offering a partnership, not a buyout. I keep the land. We develop jointly." "A charming fantasy," Chamberlain dismissed with a wave of his manicured hand. "Ms. Harrington's equestrian academies are passion projects, not sustainable businesses. Within 3 years, you'll be facing the same financial problems, but with your land encumbered by facilities you can't maintain." The assessment was precisely calculated to target Jack's deepest fears about the partnership. Had he not spent the past week working closely with Ellie and her financial team, seeing the detailed projections and thoughtful planning, the argument might have resonated. "I appreciate your concern," Jack said carefully, "but I'm inclined to pursue the partnership option." Chamberlain's expression hardened. "That would be a mistake, Reynolds, one you might not have the luxury of correcting." The threat was thinly veiled. "My offer stands for 48 hours. After that, circumstances may change in ways that affect the property's value." "Hours such as another convenient fire," Jack suggested. Dropping all pretense, Chamberlain didn't flinch. "Accidents happen, especially on aging ranches with outdated electrical systems. Tragic, but not uncommon." He rose, buttoning his tailored jacket. 48 hours. Reynolds, be sensible." After Chamberlain departed, Jack immediately contacted Agent Keller. The conversation had been recorded through a device concealed in Jack's jacket, but the implied threats weren't explicit enough to justify immediate action. "We need more," Keller explained. "Something that directly links him to the attacks. Keep playing along. Make him believe you're wavering." The next day, Jack arranged to be conspicuously arguing with Ellie in the local diner, loud enough for other patrons to overhear his doubts about their partnership. Word would inevitably reach Chamberlain's local informants. That evening, as planned, Jack drove alone to a remote section of the ranch, ostensibly to check fencing, but actually to set up the next phase of their trap. He worked by the headlights of his truck, aware that he was likely being observed. The attack, when it came, was swift and brutal. 3 men emerged from the darkness, faces concealed by masks. Jack fought back with controlled ferocity, landing several strategic blows before allowing himself to be overwhelmed. As they pinned him against his truck, the leader unmistakably Thomas Reeves, despite the mask, delivered Chamberlain's message. "Final warning, Reynolds, sign the deal, or next time we won't stop with a beating." When they departed, Jack remained slumped against his truck until certain they were gone. Then he retrieved his phone from its hiding place and confirmed that the entire encounter had been recorded, both audio and video, by devices Agent Keller had positioned earlier. "Got you, you bastards," Jack muttered through bloodied lips, feeling a grim satisfaction despite his injuries. When he returned to the ranch house, Ellie's shock at his condition quickly turned to cold anger. "This has gone far enough," she declared, cleaning a cut above his eye with gentle hands that contrasted with her fierce expression. "We're ending this now. We need to stick to the plan," Jack insisted. "Keller says we're close to connecting Chamberlain directly. And what if next time they don't stop with a beating?" Ellie demanded. "This isn't worth your life, Jack." "It's not just about Chamberlain anymore," Jack replied, wincing as she applied antiseptic. "It's about all the others he's targeted, all the families who lost their land, their legacies. Someone has to stand up to him." Ellie's hands stilled. "Like my father tried to do." The pain in her voice made Jack reach up to capture her hand in his. "I'm not your father, Ellie. I'm not alone in this fight." Their eyes met, an unspoken current passing between them. In that moment, the partnership that had begun as a business arrangement crystallized into something deeper, a shared purpose that transcended financial considerations or even justice. "No, you're not alone," Ellie agreed softly. "But we're changing the timeline. I won't risk losing another good man to Chamberlain's greed." Together, they contacted Keller and accelerated the final phase of the operation. Rather than waiting for Chamberlain to incriminate himself further, they would confront him directly at the upcoming Ironclad Investment Gala, scheduled to take place in 2 days at the exclusive Mountain Harbor Resort. "It's risky," Keller warned. "We still don't have enough to guarantee charges will stick." "Then we'll get more," Ellie stated with quiet determination. "I have sources inside Ironclad's financial operation who can provide access to their servers during the gala, when security will be focused elsewhere." "Breaking and entering wasn't part of our agreement," the agent protested. "Not breaking," Ellie corrected. "I have an invitation, and while Chamberlain is busy charming potential investors, Jack and I will be having a private conversation with his executive assistant, who happens to be my second cousin and has been feeding me information for months." Keller looked between them, clearly unhappy with the change in plans, but recognizing their determination. "You have until midnight," he conceded finally. "If you haven't secured concrete evidence by then, we move in anyway." The night of the gala arrived with a theatrical sense of timing, clear skies, a full moon illuminating the mountains, the exclusive resort gleaming with lights as luxury vehicles delivered Montana's wealthy elite, along with out-of-state investors eager to claim their piece of the last best place. Jack adjusted his unfamiliar tie, feeling exposed in the formal attire Ellie had insisted upon. "Remind me again why I can't just wait in the car." Ellie, resplendent in a midnight blue gown that transformed her from competent horsewoman to sophisticated socialite, smiled as she straightened his collar. "Because Chamberlain needs to see us together, united. It will unsettle him, make him more likely to react impulsively when we confront him later." They entered the gala with practiced confidence. Ellie's arm linked through Jack's as she guided them through the social currents with the ease of someone accustomed to such events. Jack observed the dynamics with a tactical eye noting security positions, exit routes, and the location of key players. Wesley Chamberlain held court near the center of the grand ballroom, surrounded by attentive listeners as he described Ironclad's vision for preserving Montana's heritage through thoughtful development. The hypocrisy made Jack's recently bruised ribs ache with suppressed anger. Chamberlain spotted them almost immediately, his practiced smile faltering momentarily before recovering. With a murmured excuse to his audience, he approached, champagne flute in hand. "Ms. Harrington," he greeted Ellie with cold civility. "What an unexpected pleasure. And Mr. Reynolds, you're looking somewhat battered." "Hazards of ranch work," Jack replied evenly, "though some hazards are less natural than others." "Indeed," Chamberlain agreed, his eyes calculating. "One wonders why you persist in such a dangerous profession when other options are available." "Some things are worth fighting for," Ellie interjected, her smile razor-sharp. "As you well know, Wesley—" The use of his first name clearly irritated Chamberlain, a small victory that Jack noted with satisfaction. "I assume your presence here means you've reconsidered my offer, Mr. Reynolds," Chamberlain asked, ignoring Ellie. Actually, Jack replied, we're here to make a counter-proposal. Sonner, Chamberlain's eyebrow arched with genuine surprise. Both of you, as equal partners in Wildwind's future, Ellie confirmed. We'd like to discuss it privately. Perhaps in your office here, I understand you maintain a rather impressive operational center at the resort. Suspicion flashed across Chamberlain's features. My office is for business associates, not competitors. We're offering you a way to save face, Jack pressed, lowering his voice. A compromise that gives Ironclad certain development rights while preserving our core operation. Unless you'd prefer we take our story to the investors here tonight, I'm sure they'd be fascinated to hear about your negotiation tactics. The implied threat hung in the air between them. Chamberlain's expression hardened, but he was too experienced to show real anger in such a public setting. Very well, he conceded finally. My office, 30 minutes. I have obligations to my guests first. As he walked away, Ellie squeezed Jack's arm in silent approval. Phase 1 complete. Chamberlain had taken the bait. They circulated through the gala, maintaining the pretense of socializing while monitoring Chamberlain's movements and communicating discreetly with Ellie's cousin, Margaret, who served as Chamberlain's executive assistant. According to their plan, Margaret would ensure access to Chamberlain's private server during their meeting. At the appointed time, they made their way to the resort's executive wing. Chamberlain was waiting in a luxuriously appointed office. The spectacular mountain view through floor-to-ceiling windows, suggesting ownership of the landscape itself. I'll be brief, Chamberlain began without preamble. Whatever game you're playing, it ends tonight. Wildwind Ranch will be part of Ironclad's development, with or without your cooperation. Reynolds. That sounds remarkably like a threat, Jack observed calmly. You seem fond of those. It be merely a statement of fact, Chamberlain replied. Business is business. Sentimentality about family land is a luxury you can no longer afford. Speaking of business, Ellie interjected, moving to examine a scale model of the proposed resort that dominated one corner of the office. Your investors might be interested to know that your development plans violate at least 7 environmental regulations and 2 tribal land agreements. Chamberlain dismissed this with a wave. Bureaucratic hurdles, easily navigated with the right incentives. Bribes, you mean, Jack translated. I prefer expedited approvals. Chamberlain corrected with a cold smile. But we're getting off topic. You mentioned a counter-proposal. Jack glanced at Ellie, who nodded slightly. According to their plan, Margaret should now be accessing the server from her workstation. Our proposal is simple, Jack said, drawing Chamberlain's attention. Withdraw your interest in Wildwind Ranch completely. Cease all harassment and intimidation tactics against property owners in the valley, and cooperate fully with federal authorities regarding your past activities. Chamberlain stared at him in disbelief before breaking into genuine laughter. That's not a proposal, Reynolds. That's a surrender demand, with appropriate incentives, Ellie added smoothly, such as our silence regarding certain documents we've obtained, financial records, communication logs, payment records to individuals like Thomas Reeves. The laughter died in Chamberlain's throat. You're bluffing, he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Am I? Ellie withdrew a small drive from her evening purse. This contains enough evidence to launch investigations in 3 states. At minimum, it would freeze your assets during a lengthy legal process, spooking your investors and tanking Ironclad stock. Jack watched Chamberlain's composure crack further, a vein pulsing at his temple. Where did you get that? He demanded. You should vet your employees more carefully, Jack suggested. Some of them have consciences, others have grudges. Chamberlain's expression darkened as understanding dawned. Margaret, he spat, always thought she was too principled for this business. As if on cue, Jack's phone vibrated with a text, the signal that Margaret had successfully accessed the files they needed and transmitted them to Agent Keller. All they needed now was a confession from Chamberlain himself. It's over, Wesley, Ellie said quietly. The FBI has been building a case against you for 2 years. We've just provided the final pieces. You think I haven't dealt with federal investigations before? Chamberlain scoffed, but his confidence seemed forced now. My lawyers will tie this up for years. Meanwhile, Reynolds here will still lose his precious ranch. No, he won't, Ellie countered. Our partnership is legal and funded. The bank has already approved the loan extension. Fury twisted Chamberlain's features. You self-righteous bitch, he snarled, abandoning all pretense of civility. You've been a thorn in my side since Virginia. Your father was just as stubborn, right until his heart gave out. Jack tensed at the mention of Ellie's father, but she remained outwardly calm despite the pain that flashed in her eyes. Yes, he was, she agreed. And I'm my father's daughter. He died for nothing, Chamberlain continued cruelly. I got his land anyway, just like I'll get Wildwind in the end. A few burned barns, a beating or two Reynolds will break eventually, or meet with an unfortunate accident. Rural Montana can be so dangerous. And there it was, the explicit threat they needed, spoken in Chamberlain's own voice. Jack knew the recording devices they wore had captured every word. I don't think so, Jack said, allowing his satisfaction to show. You just confessed to criminal conspiracy, assault, and arson, not to mention threatening my life. Comprehension dawned on Chamberlain's face, followed by a calculated reassessment. His hand moved toward his desk drawer. Don't, Jack warned, instantly alert. Whatever you're reaching for, it's not worth adding armed assault to your charges. Chamberlain froze, then slowly raised his hands. You're wearing wires, he stated flatly. Welcome to the 21st century, Ellie replied. Everything in this room has been recorded for the past 15 minutes. As if in response, the office door opened to admit Agent Keller, flanked by 2 additional FBI agents. Wesley Chamberlain, Keller announced formally, you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, fraud, and criminal solicitation. What followed was a blur of activity, Chamberlain being read his rights. The arrival of additional law enforcement, the discreet removal of the CEO through a service entrance to avoid disrupting the gala. Throughout it all, Jack remained beside Ellie, their shared victory tempered by the knowledge that for her, this represented the conclusion of a 5-year journey for justice. Your father would be proud, he told her quietly as they watched Chamberlain being placed in an unmarked vehicle. Ellie's composure finally cracked, tears welling in her eyes. I hope so, she whispered. I've carried him with me through all of this. Every competition, every investigation, every step toward rebuilding what he created. Jack took her hand, feeling the strength in her fingers as they interlaced with his. Then he's been part of our partnership from the beginning, he said, and he'll be part of whatever we build at Wildwind. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. News of Chamberlain's arrest sent shockwaves through the development community and brought renewed scrutiny to Ironclad's projects nationwide. Property owners who had sold under duress began exploring legal options for reclaiming their land or seeking compensation. At Wildwind Ranch, construction began in earnest on the training facilities that would form the core of Lancaster Reynolds Equestrian Academy. The name had been Jack's suggestion, honoring Ellie's family name alongside his own, a true partnership in every sense. The community's response evolved from skepticism to cautious enthusiasm as local contractors were hired and economic benefits became tangible. Jack found himself in the unexpected role of bridge builder, helping neighbors understand how the academy would complement rather than replace traditional ranching operations. Most surprising to Jack was how naturally he adapted to the changes in his life. Working alongside Ellie, he discovered an aptitude for facility design and training program development that complemented his existing skills. His innate understanding of horses and the land proved invaluable as they refined their vision for the academy. 1 year after Ellie's wagon had broken down near his property, Jack stood on the hill overlooking Wildwind Ranch, marveling at the transformation. The burned barn had been replaced with a state-of-the-art facility that nevertheless echoed the original's character. New paddocks housed 24 horses, including promising young stock for their revitalized breeding program. The main house had been carefully restored rather than replaced, preserving the Reynolds family history while accommodating the Academy's administrative needs. "Penny for your thoughts," Ellie said, joining him on the hillside. She was dressed casually in riding clothes, her hair pulled back in the practical ponytail he'd come to associate with their working relationship. "Just appreciating the view," Jack replied, "and thinking about how different things might have been if your wagon wheel hadn't broken that day." Ellie smiled, slipping her hand into his with the easy familiarity they'd developed. "I've been meaning to tell you something about that," she said, a mischievous glint in her eye. "What's that?" "The wheel wasn't exactly an accident," she admitted. "I'd already researched Wildwind and wanted to evaluate it personally, but I knew you were rejecting all formal inquiries about the property." Jack stared at her in disbelief. "You deliberately broke your wagon to meet me?" "Not broken, exactly. Just loosened a few key components." Ellie laughed at his expression. "I needed to see the real Jack Reynolds, not the defensive version who met with bank managers and developers. I figured a man's character shows most truly when he's helping a stranger in need." "You played me," Jack accused, though without real anger. "I observed you," Ellie corrected, "and what I saw convinced me that you were exactly the partner I'd been looking for, skilled, principled, and connected to the land in a way that can't be taught." Jack shook his head, amused despite himself. "You're something else, Eleanor Harrington." "So I've been told," she agreed, stepping closer. "Stubborn, calculating, and occasionally devious. And exactly what Wildwind needed," Jack added softly, drawing her into his arms. "What I needed." Their relationship had evolved alongside their business partnership, the initial attraction deepening into something more substantial as they faced challenges together. The age difference that might once have seemed significant, Ellie at 45 to Jack's 48, had proved meaningless compared to their shared values and complementary strengths. "The first students arrive next week," Ellie reminded him, resting her head against his shoulder. "Are you ready for this next chapter?" Jack looked out over the ranch, his family's legacy now intertwined with Ellie's vision for the future. The land remained, as it had for generations, but its purpose had expanded rather than diminished. Cattle still grazed in the eastern pastures, while horses trained in the new facilities. The Reynolds heritage continued, not as a museum piece, but as a living, evolving stewardship. "More than ready," he assured her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Partners in everything." Remember, as they stood together on the hillside, the late afternoon sun gilding the landscape in golden light, Jack reflected on the strange turns of fate that had brought them to this moment. A desperate farmer fixing a stranger's wagon, unaware she was a famous equestrian who would save his ranch and, in the process, help him create something neither could have built alone. "Partners in everything," Ellie echoed, turning her face up to his. "That's a promise I intend to keep." Below them, Wildwind Ranch stretched out in all its renewed vitality, a testament to what could be preserved through change, what could be built on the foundations of the past. And as Jack sealed their promise with a kiss, he knew with absolute certainty that the best chapters of their story, both personal and professional, were just beginning.